Hi everyone, good afternoon. We have such a great turnout today. A lot of attendees still coming in. So thank you all for making the time to join us. We have a really packed session ahead for you regarding the release of the environmental footprint database for SimaPro users. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. The session is being recorded already. Most of you are on mute, but if you want to share your questions or comments, please do that via the chat or the questions box, and we will address your questions whenever it's relevant in the session, or we will keep it to until the end for the Q&A. All right. So I'm really happy to introduce today's speakers, who are also my colleagues from PRAE. And have been heavily involved in the implementation of the environmental footprint database and the impact assessment method. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I guess some new faces, some familiar faces for the audience. Yeah, maybe we can start with Luca. So Luca Zampori is a senior consultant at PRAE and works on several projects in the field of life cycle assessment, including life cycle databases and pioneering projects to translate scientific progress into practical solutions. And maybe nice for you to know, before joining PRAE, Luca actually worked at the interface between science and policymaking at the Joint Research Center, the JRC of the European Commission, where he has contributed or led actually many activities in relation to the methodological development of the environmental footprint methods via PEF and OF. So great to have you here, Luca.
Yeah, thank you, Ruba, and good afternoon to everyone.
Also joining us is Elsa Valencia Martinez, who's been at PRAE for around 7 years now and is currently part of the database. Elsa.
Hello to everyone.
During her time at PRAE, she's done several OCAs and tools for our clients, and her focus is currently on database implementation and data conversion for SimaPro, including, of course, the implementation of the EF databases. So also great to have you here. Thank you for your efforts. Also, a colleague of Elsa's from the database team, maybe a familiar face as well, is Clara. So Clara is a newer member of the team, joining in October 2021. Where she works mainly on the implementation of databases and impact assessment methods. So great to have you, Clara. And also joining me, maybe a more familiar face, is Michiel Ula, and yeah, he's my colleague in the support team, where he is our product, SimaPro and product specialist. So Michiel really drives the development of the SimaPro desktop solution, and also has been in touch with a lot of you maybe for technical issues and support. So thank you, Michiel, for joining. And
welcome.
He will
nice
be
to not see you. What can I say?
Yeah, and he will be explaining later on about how to access the data, where to find it, and how to update if you're using an older version of the database. Yeah. And finally, I'm Ruba. I'm leading the support team at PRAE, where we help users get the most out of our SimaPro solutions. And I'll just be facilitating the session. So I'll turn off my camera now and move on to the next point. Oh, yes. So what you can expect the coming hour, Luca will start off with a little bit of a background on the project, the transition phase, previous releases. And one thing we get asked a lot about, can I use this EF data? So he will also capture a little bit of the eligibility and what you need to access the data. He will then move on to show us what's included in the data, give an overview of the libraries included, the impact assessment method. Also, Clara will be explaining how it's been implemented in SimaPro. Then they will move on to giving tips to keep in mind when modeling using this database, and followed by a demo in SimaPro. So stay tuned for that. After that, Michiel will give an overview of where you can find the database, how you can download it, what's included in the download package. And if you've used a previous version, the officially released version was EF2, so that will be our focus, how to update from EF2 to EF3. And Elsa will also help explain the use of replacement files and things to make users' lives a little easier when updating. And to close the session, we will give a short outlook on what you can expect next, and the developments on the data front and licensing. So now I give the floor to you, Luca.
Thanks, Ruba. Okay. So I will start with a background on the EF project. I will start explaining what an EF compliant dataset is. So what does EF compliant mean? EF compliant datasets have been developed in the context of the EF pilot phase and the EF transition phase. And basically they mean two main things. One is the compliance with the guide for EF compliant datasets. This is a guide which has been developed by the Joint Research Center in collaboration with many data and software providers and with DG Environment. And basically it provides a full set of rules on how to deal with many aspects in generating EF compliant datasets. Like it provides explanation on the different dataset types, on how to compile the metadata information, what are the mandatory metadata information that needs to be included in a dataset, and what are other options that can be included. It also provides rules on how to harmonize the so-called level 1 datasets. I will explain later what a level 1 dataset is. And it also provides a full set of requirements related to modeling rules that EF datasets need to comply with. So for instance, how to apply the circular footprint formula in EF compliant datasets, how to deal with agricultural modeling, how to deal with cutoff, and all of these type of modeling rules. So this is the first backbone of the compliance scheme. The second backbone of the compliance scheme is the format, is the data format. So all of the EF compliant datasets are developed in compliance with the so-called ILCD format, which is the International Lifecycle Reference Data System, and the so-called EF reference package. Until today, different EF reference packages have been developed and they have been released by the European Commission. So these are official files that come from the European Commission. You may have heard about the EF 2.0 data package, and now we are at the EF 3.1 data package. And an EF reference package is quite a complicated set of items, but for you to know, it contains the list of default elementary flows, the list of the characterization factors of all of the 16 impact categories of the PEF method, and a full set of reference files. You can find the EF reference package at this web link here. So EF compliant datasets come as of today in two levels of aggregation. One, the first one is the fully aggregated datasets, and it's the ones that we have implemented for the time being in SimaPro. And a fully aggregated dataset is constituted by a complete or a partial life cycle of a product system, and it only includes input-output elementary flows. So basically, there is no input from Technosphere or other processes that are inputted to these datasets. If we can make an analogy, they basically are like the system processes that we are used to in SimaPro. The partial aggregated at level 1 came from a necessity of the PEF methodology. And basically, these datasets are needed to comply with the data needs matrix, which is available in the PEF method. And basically, a partial aggregated at level 1 is a dataset with a very low level of disaggregation, and it allows to adjust a few meaningful inputs. Like here we have a scheme, and you see that we have energy, which is disaggregated, transport by mode, which is also disaggregated, and some input material components that can also be disaggregated. So these are the three items that in a partly aggregated at level 1 datasets can be adjusted by the user. These datasets are not available yet, also because they are not fully available from the data providers. So this I will touch upon in the outlook part of this webinar. Now I want to give you a bit of background of the EF transition phase, because this is the context where the EF 3.1 database has been developed. So as you may know, the PEF journey started in April 2013 with the publication of the first version of the PEF guide. The first version of the PEF guide was included in a recommendation that belonged to the Single Market for the Green Products initiative. And this pilot phase lasted until 2018. And in these 5 years of pilot phase, many PFCRs and OEFSRs, which are PEF category rules and OEF sector rules, have been developed. And also the requirements for EF compliant datasets have been developed. At the end of the pilot phase in 2018, a so-called transition phase has started. And this transition phase has been set up by the European Commission, by DG ENV together with DG GROW, with three main goals. The first one is about monitoring the implementation of the existing PFCRs. Second one is to develop new PFCRs. So new PFCRs are under development in the EF transition phase, like for instance, the one on synthetic turf that Prey is also supporting, or the one on apparel, and a few others. And the third goal of the transition phase is to start implementing PEF in different policies. So different policy proposals have been set in place during this transition phase, and we can see some main ones listed in this slide. So in December 2019, the European Green Deal was published, and it contained several initiatives and action plans. I just mentioned a relevant one, which was published in March 2020, which is the Circular Economy Action Plan, where PEF has quite a role in that context. Then in May 2020, the Biodiversity and the Farm to Fork strategies were published, and that is also somehow relevant for PEF. Then in December 2021, the European Commission adopted an updated version of the PEF method. So it published a recommendation which includes as annexes to this recommendation the new EF methods. Following these policy proposals, a few policies start to be in place. I mentioned just a few ones. In Q4 2020, the Sustainable Batteries Regulation was proposed by the Commission, and there the use of PEF was in the context of mandatory carbon footprint declaration for batteries based on the batteries PFCR. In Q1 2022, the Sustainable Products Initiative has been published, and that is also one of those policies where PEF can play a role. While in Q1 2023, the proposal for a directive on substantiating green claims has been proposed by the Commission. So how the different EF reference packages and then the different EF databases relate to these various phases. So the EF 2.0 database and EF reference package was the one valid in the context of the EF pilot phase, and to apply the PFCRs that were developed in the EF pilot phase. The EF 3.0 package was released at the beginning of the transition phase, but it has been quite early superseded by the EF 3.1 package, and the database that we implemented in the SimaPro today is in compliance with this EF reference package. So basically the 2.0 is outdated. The 3.0 has never been actively used in the context of the PEF, and the EF 3.1 is the one that is currently valid. The Commission is already thinking to what's next, and an EF 4.0 package and datasets are in the pipeline. And it's expected to be valid as of 2025-2026. Okay, so after this overview on the EF context, a key question to be answered is who can use the data? As of today, the environmental footprint database can be used free of charge only if you are conducting a PEF or an OEF study, which is fully compliant with the PFCRs and the OEFSRs that have been approved by the European Commission. So these are the ones that were developed in the EF pilot phase, that will be updated in the EF transition phase, and that will be developed in the EF transition phase. And to know the all of the user rights, you need to accept the end user license agreements from all of the different database providers. At this web link, you can find all of the EULAs of the different data providers. Just to give a quick overview, these are the 5 data providers that we have in the EF 3.1 database. And these use rights are valid until the 31st of December 2024 for the datasets provided by Sfera, while they are valid until the 31st of December 2025 for all of the other data providers. Okay, now let's deep dive into the database content. So what do we have in the database? The database has more than 4,000 EF compliant datasets, all in aggregated version. You can find the original datasets in the Lifecycle Data Network. And at this link, you can access the Lifecycle Data Network. I will show you later with a live demo. So each of the data providers manages a node in the Lifecycle Data Network. And within a node, the different data sets are stored in several data stocks. What we have done in SimaPro is that we have made each data stock corresponding to a separate library in SimaPro. This is for practical reasons, but also in the future, in case one would want to purchase one specific library. These are all of the libraries that are implemented. So as you see, there is a library from EcoInvent, which is called Chemicals Part 1, which is an update package from the EF pilot phase. Then we have datasets developed by a consortium from EcoInvent, Pre, and Blanc, which is called Chemicals Part 2, Apparel Parts 1, Apparel Part 2, and Apparel Part 3, Plastics, and a so-called Others data package. We have called these libraries the same exact way as the name that you find in the data stocks, so that you have a one-to-one correspondence. Then from the Sector Association of Paints, we have Chemicals for Paints. From FEFAC Blanc, we have Feed, Agri-Food, and Renewables. And from Sfera, we have the so-called core data. So the core part 1, which includes energy, packaging, transport, and end of life. And core part 2, which includes non-packaging plastics, electric and electronics, metals and minerals, but also a few others. The database also contains the EF 3.1 impact assessment method. So this is the fully compliant impact assessment method. And here you can see in this table what changes between the EF 3.0 data package impact assessment method and the EF 3.1 impact assessment method. Basically, at the beginning of the EF transition phase, the Commission released the EF 3.0 method, which contained a few updates compared to the EF 2.0 method. Here you can see the updates from the 3.0 compared to the 2.0, and mainly goes about the toxicity impact categories, an updated version of the land use impact categories, and a few adaptations here and there. At some point, it was deemed necessary to update the method especially for climate change. This was really a driver because now the climate change impact category is aligned to the IPCC 2021 methodology. The toxicity impact categories were also deeply revised. Some subcategories were merged. For instance, metals and inorganics subcategories were merged. Some characterization factors were also revised because they were outliers in the impact assessment method, and some principles were also revised. A few adaptations were also included in other impact categories like photochemical ozone formation and acidification. So some obvious mistakes were corrected while updating the impact assessment method. At these two links here, you can find some supporting materials. The 3.1 method comes overall with 16 midpoint impact categories. Next to that, we have also a normalization set and a weighting set. In the context of the PEF, it is mandatory to calculate and report normalized impacts and weighted impacts, along with the overall single score. So the normalization set is implemented in the database, and this is updated with each release of the EF reference package, because the calculation of the normalization factors is strictly dependent from the characterization factors, while the weighting set has remained unchanged from the EF 2.0 to the 3.0 until the 3.1 database. I give now the floor to my colleague Clara to explain the differences between the EF method that we have in the official database, in the official EF database, and in the adapted in the adapted method which is available in the professional database. So Clara, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Luca. Yeah, as Luca also already mentioned, we distribute two versions of the environmental footprint 3.1 method in our SimaPro databases. One is the official version in the EF 3.1 database, and the other one is the adapted version in the professional 9.5 database. You might be wondering what the difference between the two is. So the difference is that the official method is restricted to the substance list of the EF 3.1 reference package, while the adapted method has been adapted, as the name says, to be more compatible with the data libraries of the professional database. One type of adaptation that we made is that we characterized additional substance flows, since they are used extensively in the SimaPro background libraries and because the synonyms are part of the official EF method. So for the adapted method, we, for example, also included fossil resources in mass units, while in the official EF method, fossil resources are occur only in energy units, and we added them based on the lower heating values. And another adaptation is that we removed some substance flows in subcompartments which we currently don't support in SimaPro and which are not used by any of the data libraries. And examples are subcompartments high stack or very high stack for airborne emissions. And one last adaptation is that also in the adapted method, we dealt a bit differently with synonymous or duplicate EF flows than in the official method. Synonymous or duplicate flows are flows which represent the same substance, but which might have different characterization factors according to the reference package. And while in the official EF method, we need to keep them as separate substances so they retain their original characterization factors. In the adapted method, we mapped these to one substance by combining their characterization factors, and whenever there were conflicting factors, we kept the higher one. And I'll hand over back to you, Luca.
Thank you, Clara. So I move to the next, the last slide for this block, which is additionally in the database, we have also implemented the default parameters of the circular footprint formula. The PEF method requires, when implementing the circular footprint formula, to use default values from the so-called Annex C. The Annex C is a big Excel file with many values related to the recycled content, recyclability at end of life, landfilling rates, and the allocation factor A of the CFF. So all of these numbers that you normally would need to go back and retrieve in the Excel file are already implemented in the database. So basically that is, it's more handy and there is less risk of mistakes in implementing the CFF. Now, let me give you some handy tips when modeling, because some of the EF database is a bit peculiar in some aspects. So I think it's relevant that you are aware of a few tricks. First of all, dummy processes. You may you may see in the database that some of the processes are gate-to-gate data sets. So they are not cradle-to-gate, they are gate-to-gate. So basically they are incomplete product systems. These incomplete product systems are identified in an EF terminology by this dataset type. The dataset type partly terminated system identifies a dataset that needs to be completed in one of the inputs. So when you see that a dataset is a partly terminated system, very likely you have a dummy process, which is identified here as input from Technosphere. And basically, this dummy process is a placeholder for a dataset to be added by the user. So in this case, aluminum casting gate-to-gate needs some liquid aluminum to be to complete the life cycle. So that process has to be added manually by the user. This dummy is just a placeholder. You need to replace it. While LCI results, this should not have dummy processes. If you have doubts, you can check, of course, but normally the categorization, unless it's done in a wrong way by the original data provider, this category should not have any dummy process. Another tip is about long-term emissions. Long-term emissions are treated in a tricky way in the PEF because they have been excluded for the toxicity impact categories. So there is no characterization factor, or actually there is a characterization factor of 0 for long-term emissions for human tox, cancer and non-cancer, and for ecotoxicity. However, in many other impact categories, the long-term emissions have a characterization factor. And this is the case for all of the impact categories that you see here, like eutrophication marine, eutrophication freshwater, ionizing radiation, acidification, climate change, and so on. So you know that when ticking the exclude long-term emissions box in SimaPro, these substances would not be characterized. And that basically leads to change the results for these impact categories. Now, the implementation of the method in SimaPro has been done in a way where if the long-term emission characterization factor is equal to the one of the unspecified substance, then only the characterization factor of the unspecified substance is implemented in SimaPro. And this is because in this way, the long-term emission inherits the characterization factor of the unspecified one. So basically, it's actually calculated. While in the case of toxicity impact categories, you will see that the characterization factor for long-term emissions has been set equal to 0. Another tip is about ecotoxicity. Ecotoxicity has a huge amount of characterization factors, many thousand. So it had to be split in SimaPro into two main parts, into two separate parts, called part 1 and part 2. So when you look at the characterization tab in SimaPro, you see that ecotoxicity has two parts. So to move from the two parts to the single ecotoxicity freshwater impact category result, then you need to use the damage assessment tab. So if you move from characterization to damage assessment, you have the cumulative results. Also, metadata in the ILCD format are stored in a tricky way, which is not fully compatible with the way we normally store metadata. So we decided to include in the database those metadata that are most relevant for application in the context of PEF studies. So you will find for sure the UIDs of the datasets, so the unique identifiers of the datasets, and this is because PFCRs reference these UUIDs in the within the documents, and you also find the version number because some data providers may update a dataset. So a dataset would keep the same name, the same process UUID, but then the version number really tells you what exact version of the dataset you're using. Also, data quality indicators are actively used in the context of a PEF study, so they are reported here in the metadata. While if you want to have access to the full metadata, those can be found in the lifecycle data network. I will show it to you. So now let's have a look in SimaPro, and I need to stop the slideshow. Okay. So I want to show you, first of all, how the libraries are organized and the lifecycle data network. I go a bit step by step. So at this web link, here you can find all of the nodes that contain EF compliant datasets. So for instance, here you see that there is the EcoInvent node, and it tells you what are the data lots that are present here. If we click here on this link, we are redirected to the EcoInvent node. So here you find a lot of information. And then here on the top right, you find what I mentioned before, the data stocks. And here the data stocks contain all of the different data sets that are needed in the database. So for instance, if we click here on the EF 3.1 plastics, then we would have access to the, oops, I'm not looking in. You have access to the full list of processes. Now, what we have done in SimaPro, so if you see here, you see all of these data stocks. In SimaPro, you will find the corresponding libraries. So for instance, for EcoInvent, here in brackets, you can find the data provider. You find all of these separate libraries. Let's now look at the method, what I showed before. Here you find the EF 3.1 method. In the metadata field, you find a lot of useful information on the different impact categories and some data sources. And if we click on the method, so you find what I mentioned before. So if we click the characterization tab, you find all of the impact categories plus subcategories of the PEF method. So here you find, for instance, the breakdown for climate change, biogenic fossil, land use, and land use change. So if that contributes more than 5%, then you would have to report it additionally in your PEF study. And here you find also the subcategories for ecotoxicity and human toxicity, inorganics, organics. And if you want to see the cumulate and only the baseline 16 impact categories, then you move to the damage assessment. And here you see that you don't have any more a division for ecotoxicity freshwater, but it's only one impact category. And the same for climate change, you don't have the subcategory, it's only the main category. Also, next to that, if we look at the parameters, here you need to go into database parameters. You find all of the parameters of the circular footprint formula. Here you find the A values, and here there is also a comment that is telling you to not change these values. These will need to remain fixed. And if we scroll down, you see all of the A factors, the R1 factors, so the recycled content of the circular footprint formula, the R2 values, so the amount that is recycled at end of life, and the incineration rates coming always from the Annex C, and finally, the quality factors that are implemented in Annex C and the landfilling rates. And this is a calculated parameter based on the incineration rate. I just want to show you one example of dummy process where you find it. So basically in this screen, you see that we have many datasets categorized as LCI result. At some point, we find, for instance, here a partly terminated system, but also here we have a partly terminated system. So as I said before, these partly terminated systems, if you scroll down until the inputs from Technosphere, you will find a dummy dataset. So this is telling you that to complete a cradle to gate study, cradle to gate dataset, then I need to plug 1.323 kilograms of aluminum ingot. Finally, I just want to show you quickly how the documentation is implemented in a process. Oh, okay, so here in the comment field, we have this tag, which is the process metadata. And here we have some general comments. So here you find the process UIDs and the version number. And here you find the descriptions of the technological representativeness, the time representativeness, and a few other information. If you scroll down, you find the data quality indicators that have to be used in your PEF study. Okay, I go back to my slides.
Luca, maybe we can take a few questions that a lot of questions we were asking in the chat, but maybe a few questions.
Yes.
So I was, one of the users was wondering about the normalization and weighting of the impact assessment method. Is there documentation available there that we can refer them to, or is it in the links you already provided?
Yes, we have links. Let me see if I put the links in the slides. Where is it? Okay, I don't have the links here, but in SimaPro, you will find the links to the relevant information of the method. So both for characterization, for normalization and weighting, that should all be in the comment field of the EF of the impact assessment method. In any case, all of the underlying information is available on the website of the JRC, but those links you will find in the database in SimaPro.
Okay, thank you. And another question, a separate topic, but where can one find the complete list of PFCRs that have been developed? For example, one user was looking for the PFCR for metal products, but has not been able to find it.
That's a very good question, because until a few months ago, they were easily accessible on the website of the European Commission of DG Environment. Now these PFCRs, so basically the PFCRs were stored under the EF pilot initiative on the DGM website. Now that website has been archived by the Commission. So you need to access somehow the archive through the DGF website, and it is accessible. I don't have the link here, but if you Google PFCR EF pilot phase DGENV, then you should be able to be redirected to the full list of PFCRs, because it has been recently, like a couple of months ago, it has been archived by the Commission.
Okay, thanks, Luca. I think we can continue, and maybe if we have time left, we can pick up later a few more questions.
Yes. Okay, I think I can now hand it over to Michael for accessing the database.
Yes, thank you very much.
I also
Yeah.
control Michael.
Well, if you can go to the next slide.
Yeah, you should also have control. In case you don't have it, just tell me next.
Yeah, I see it now. Well, just a few words. Where to download the database if you don't have a database already. This points you to find it. It's on our website, SimaPro.com, and if you go, you need to fill in a form and then accept the EULAs to download an installation package. Now, this installation package includes the database installer, the user manual, and also update instructions. But these update instructions are, of course, only relevant for users that were using the older version of EcoVent, or if EcoVent, the EF2 database. So if you need to update it, you can use this database, but the same database is equally useful for new users that never used the environmental footprint before. So if you are a new user, you download this package, you unzip it, you install, and you have the database, you're really ready to go. You make a project, and yeah, that will challenge start really. One thing that is important to understand is that you should not import the EF database in your professional database. The EF database, whether it was 2.0 or 3.1, is intended to be used as a separate database. It should not be imported in your, let's say, professional database, the default database that you typically work in. And the reason is that when you're doing EF studies, you're only allowed to work with an EF compliant elementary flow list. Well, we call that substances in SimaPro, but the regular SimaPro database is using a different nomenclature. And that is because obviously the SimaPro database comes with data from many different sources, from EcoEvent, from Plastics Europe, from US LCI, all over the place. And by combining two databases, well, you risk using non-compliant EF substances, and the other way around, the EF substances that were defined in the EF database are obviously not always included in the methods that we include in the default SimaPro database. So please do not mix and match the two databases.
Yeah. Before you move on, Michiel, I just wanted to confirm that all the tips that Luca also explained are available in the user manual, which is in the download package, as Michiel explained. So there's a bit more context and more information also in the user manual.
That's correct. Well, the installation, it's pretty straightforward as with any updates in installation. What I said, you download the zip file, you run the setup file to install the database. Then it stops if you are a new user. If you are a user of the EF2.0 version, you import the database into previous database. You will see the new data in your overview of libraries. Then there are two important steps. One is to append the substance list. Actually, different append files for EF2 and 3, but it's not relevant for now. These substances will update the nomenclature from EF2 to EF31. And then separately, there is something called a replacement file, and the replacement file will update your links in the projects that you have from EcoEvent 2, from the library EF2 to EF31. Now, these instructions are included in the download package, so you can, please read them carefully and also follow these steps carefully, because we sometimes get questions where you think, okay, you started, but you skipped the most important steps, which are literally the last two ones. And now I can actually hand over to Elsa, who can explain a little bit more about the use of the replacement function. And
Thank you, Michelle.
If there are any questions on this, I think not, but let's keep them for the end of the presentation.
Yeah,
Thank
nothing
you all.
for now. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Michelle. So I will expand a little bit on the step number 6. That's the update of links. So also in this download package, you will receive a replacement file, which is an Excel file, basically. With that, SimaPro can automatically update the links you have from EF 2.0 to EF 3.1. So if you created already a model in the 2.0 library, then this is very handy to just automatically do this step. The replacement file includes a one-to-one replacement, so that covers 92% of the EF2 database. So those are direct links. We also included 2 additional tabs in the file. One is proxies. So those are suggestions that JRC provided for some of the data sets that change a little bit. Maybe they change their system boundary or the technology, or they are not one-to-one replacement. So you can look at this list. It's around 30 processes, and you can see if there is something used in your model that you have to manually adapt. And if you agree with the suggestion, then you can do that step yourself. And there is also a tab without equivalent, that those are 220 processes that are no longer part of the EF 3.1 database. So also, if you use them in your model, you have to decide yourself if how you handle that, if you remove them from the model or you select another region or another process that matches what you are doing in your model. So very briefly, I can explain you that in your model, to run the append, you have to go to Tools, Projects to Libraries, Links Manager. Then you select the projects you want to update, and you also select the EF2 library from the list. And then you click on Scan, and that will start looking at every link used in your model in those projects. And then you will get a list of all the processes and the links to EF 2.0. Then you can select import replacement and select the file path to the replacement file in Excel. After this import is, the Excel will be read by SimaPro, and it will let you know, you will have a pop-up telling you how many of the links you have are included in the replacement, so how many can be replaced from one-to-one from both libraries. And if you agree with that list, and if you're happy with it, you can, first you can check if it's all correct, if the conversion factors are well, because maybe the dataset change its quantity. You can also check if everything is correct, then you click on replace. But if you see in this list, you see empty spaces, that means there are no replacements found in the EF 3.1 database. So you have to look at these proxies or list of processes without equivalent that I just mentioned. So you can do that step manually in this screen. Once this is filled in and you're happy, then you click on replace, and everything will be replaced in your process. If you want to know more about this procedure, or you want to look at it once again, you can visit simapro.com, and there is a video that explains you really step by step how to do it. And then, I hand over to my colleagues for the the next steps in the EF database project.
Yes, thank you very much, Elsa. So some work still needs to be done on the EF 3.1 database. As I said before, the current version of the database contains the aggregated datasets from all of the data providers, and these are available in SimaPro Desktop. Now the next step for us is to implement the database and the method also in the SimaPro platform, and this is planned to be done by Q3 this year, 2023. Also, it could be that new data libraries that are pending DC approval may become available, but I don't have any further information on this. I just know that some data sets, some libraries may be approved by the EC. So as soon as these new data libraries are available, we will implement them in SimaPro. So that would be ideally in Q3 2023, but we cannot be certain about it. And hopefully there will be not many mistakes found by the Commission in the datasets, because that would mean that we would need to update the database to be aligned to the latest version of the datasets available in the Lifecycle Data Network. So that is not dependent on us. Then, as I said before, the EF 3.1 database are also developed in the so-called level 1 level of disaggregation, so partly aggregated datasets at level 1. So these datasets are a bit peculiar because they are developed in a new data format, which is called extended ILCD, EILCD. And it is the first time that the Commission and the data providers contracted by the Commission develop these data sets. So they need to undergo also a certain level of scrutiny to make sure that they are correct. And we expect to be able to import them and make them available in SimaPro by the end of this year, so in Q4 2023. And this is also depending on when all of the datasets will be made available by the various data providers. With this, I think we are done for today, unless there are some questions.
Hi, Luca. Yes, indeed. There are a bunch of questions. A few topics come back, mostly about the use of the circular footprint formula. Would it be possible to kind of just show it again and show, or also provide information if there's additional information on how to use the formula, or is it something you can explain at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, to use the formula, maybe now we don't have much time, to be honest, because we will need to create a process, etc. What I wanted to show only was the what is it? The fact that we have made available the parameters as database parameters. So those are all of the parameters that you need to use in the circular footprint formula. So you know that the circular footprint formula has several parameters. It has a value of A. Let me show it again, maybe in SimaPro. 1 second. So if I go here, these are all of the parameters that are needed to model the circular footprint formula. So starting from the top, you have an A factor, which is the allocation factor that distributes impacts between virgin and recycled materials. Then you have the R values. So these are the R1 values, which is the recycled content for each material and each application, which is available in the Annex C. So you apply an application-specific R1 value. Then we have the R2 value, which is the recyclability at end of life. So how much material you recycle at end of life. So for instance, in this case, steel packaging. So the recycling rate of steel packaging in Spain will be 86.9%. And then we have all of other parameters that are needed to implement the formula that I showed before, which is the incineration rate, which would be the R3 of the formula. So this incineration rate corresponds to R3. Then we have the quality factors, QS in over QP, that apply to the recycled to the recycling processes at the input and the output side, and the landfilling rate. What is missing here is the data set. So EREC, EV, E-star V, so the emissions of the process, because that has to be entered by the user. But now it's a bit time demanding to build an example from scratch, Ruba.
Thank you. I think that explains things nicely. And I invite users, if you have further questions, to contact us at support@simapro.com. There are also a number of questions still open. So whatever we don't get a chance to explain now, we will do definitely after the webinar. Another few questions, maybe Clara, you can again recap. What are the main differences between the EF methods, the one in the professional database versus the one in the separate EF database? And what are the main differences there?
Yes, sure. Basically, the main differences are that for the adapted method, we basically took the original EF method and then made some adjustments to it, so it fits better the substances that we use in the professional database. And the main adaptations are the ones that I presented earlier, so that we, for example, removed some substances or subcompartments which were not, which are not supported by any substances that we use in the professional database. And then also that we made those anonymous or duplicate posts together in the professional database, while in the EF database we give them different characterization factors, so really like adhering to the ones that are in the reference package published by the European Commission. But basically also all those adaptations are can be seen in this method manual that we provide in SimaPro. So I also shared a link in the chat where you can find the methods manual, and then there's like a more detailed overview of the different adaptations that we did.
Thank you, Clara. We did get also some questions regarding clarification, whether somebody is allowed to use the data or not. I find that a tricky question. I don't think we really have the authority to approve or give permission. I would advise to check the EULAs and also to maybe contact the developer directly. But maybe, Luca, you want to add something?
Yes, because I mean, as you said, Ruba, if you don't comply with the EULA, then you cannot use the datasets for free. But then it would be interesting for us to know if somebody who is interested to have access to the database beyond the ones that comply with the EULA, so that we can start having a list of people that are interested and evaluate what could be the possible solutions. Because the solutions do not depend fully on us, but they depend also on agreements that we may get with the various data providers. So if you're interested, please drop a message.
Yes, you can reach us at support@simapro.com and we will collect these responses and prepare a reaction. There are also a number of open questions. We really thank you for your engagement and your interest and for making the time to attend this session. Time is up, but to be continued, like I mentioned, we will be happy to answer all your questions and send out the response the coming week. For now, I'd like to thank our speakers who are also have been heavily involved in the implementation of the data and the method. So thank you for all your efforts and hope to see you all virtually in another session. Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, and thank you, Luba, as well.